I'm John McClain, and on this episode of Making A-Class, I'm going to talk about the difference between this and this. Didn't notice it? Let's break it down. Welcome to episode 2 of Making A-Class. I am, of course, John McClain. In this episode, we're going to talk about trigger manipulation and how we're losing time when it comes to proper trigger control. And more importantly, again, this has nothing really to do about shooting, but it has everything to do with what's going on between shots. And a lot of the time, that's where you'll find you're losing a little bit of time, maybe 1/10 of a second. But as we've said before, 1/10 of a second does matter. So let me explain. When I first started shooting, I started with a striker-fired pistol, much like this one. And what I learned and what I was taught was that after you break your shot, to then keep the trigger pinned to the rear, let the gun recoil. Bring the trigger forward until you hear and feel that very distinct reset. From there, apply backwards pressure and break the next shot. So the concept behind this thinking was that you eliminated excess trigger movement, which could essentially eliminate any potential errors because you're limiting how much movement is going on with the firearm. And while it was it was a good thing to learn from a beginner standpoint of how trigger reset and the trigger feel works, one day while training with JJ Ricazza, he kept hearing that distinct of my reset, and he kind of stopped me and brought something to my attention. And what he brought to my attention was the fact that I was losing so much time in keeping that trigger pinned to the rear versus through recoil, using the recoil and the time where the gun is cycling and I have to reacquire my sights to reset the trigger and then prep the trigger again. So before we get too far into the details, let me show you these video clips where I really get a chance on the timer to show you how much time I was actually losing in that moment from a B class to a now master level shooter, when it comes to shooting striker fired, that is. How much time I was losing and how the time really had nothing to do with, again, the actual act of shooting the pistol fast. It was just I had to learn how to do other things faster. So let's take a look real quick. So let's start with this video by keeping it pinned to the rear. So what we're doing is after the gun's recoiled, we've started the process of coming off the trigger, but we don't want to over-correct and come too far off the trigger because then we have too much play in the pre-travel. So you're bringing the trigger just far enough forward to reset and then immediately breaking your next shot, and you've got a total time of 350. Now let's compare that to resetting and prepping the trigger through recoil. As you'll watch in this video, through recoil, my finger comes off the trigger and then I prep it again. And now as soon as the sight is on target and I'm ready to fire, I just have to finish that trigger pull. And the time is 2.46 seconds. That's a difference of 1.04 seconds, okay? In this next set of videos, we're gonna just go ahead and keep the same. Trigger pinned to the rear. The total time is 3.12. And in this next video, I'm going to reset and prep through recoil for a total time of 2.53. That is 0.59 seconds difference, and yet I still got all alphas. I didn't sacrifice any points. Now that we've shown you the videos, now that you've actually seen the numbers to prove that keeping the trigger pinned to the rear and slowly coming to the reset before breaking the shot was slower than go ahead and just coming off the trigger and prepping it through the recoil process, let's talk a little bit more about what happens visually and mentally in that moment. See, as a B-class shooter, when I was keeping that trigger pinned to the rear, as soon as I'd get my sights acquired through the recoil and I was still in the process of resetting the trigger, my brain was ready to shoot. It was telling me to shoot. And in the process of still prepping the trigger, I would start to feel like I was behind the clock. Therefore, I resulted to rushing the rest of the reset, maybe not even prepping the trigger at all, just going from 0 to hero and getting shots pushed to the left, flinches low left, and not really confirming that I was getting good shots because I was feeling rushed. I was really focused more on rushing the process and trying to shoot fast versus just doing what I needed to do. by transitioning over to this new method where in the recoil process, I just came off the trigger for the reset and then I prepped it again, what it did was that once my sights were acquired and on the target, I was never rushed because I was already ready to shoot. So all I had to do in that moment was just finish the trigger press. And because I was never in a rush, I never felt like I was behind the clock, what I found was that my hits got better. And because I had incorporated several steps into one portion of the recoil process, I ended up having faster split times, yet I never actually pulled the trigger faster than I could see my sights. So I resulted in having 10s to 2/10 of a second freed up between my split times, and yet I didn't sacrifice my points or the proper trigger press that was necessary to make those points happen. Now, let's travel to our imaginary 300 round 10-stage match. 300 rounds, and you're able to take 1/10 of a second off of each time you send one of those rounds down range, equals 30 seconds of time. That is huge in a major match setting. I mean, 30 seconds is massive, right? And all that did, or all it required, was for you to increase your shot-to-shot time by 1/10 of a second, and yet at no point has it caused you to, or has it forced you to actually try and physically pull the trigger faster. We've just tried to make you more efficient through that whole recoil process. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, then maybe the next episode will, where we talk about transitions and how we can maybe shave a little bit more time off by only taking 1/10 of a second. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Make sure that you like, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you'll be notified when I drop the next episode of Making A Class with me, John McClain.